Welcome to Supply Chain Horizons, our video podcast series that looks at crucial issues facing global supply chain teams. This video podcast is sponsored by Logility, a leading provider of supply chain solutions used by more than 1,250 companies in over 70 countries around the world. You can access this podcast and many others by visiting logility.com. Just click on the library link. So let's get started. I'm Corinne Bursa, a Vice President at Logility, and I'd like to share with you some enlightening conversations I've been having with supply chain innovators and industry insiders. Today, I am joined by Ed Thompson. Ed is the Senior Vice President of Global Services for Logility and is responsible for helping customers maximize the benefits that they achieve with Logility Voyager solutions. Ed's experience includes both IT and operational roles with leading apparel and consumer goods companies. Ed, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Corinne. Happy to be here.
You know, Ed, you've got some really deep understanding of the supply chain opportunities and some of the challenges that apparel and footwear soft goods companies face. If I remember correctly, you were part of the startup team with the Hanes Her Way footwear business, which is now part of Hanes Brands, and have also worked with companies like Columbia Sportswear, Polo Ralph Lauren, Payless Shoes, and Adidas, just to name a few. And this apparel industry has a pretty dynamic supply chain, and they've got the added challenge of changing seasons, changing styles, changing consumer tastes, and doing all of this in a cost-effective and timely way as they work with manufacturing partners that may be on the other side of the world. Tell us a little bit about the challenges that you see in working with apparel companies.
Well, it's quite interesting because the apparel industry on the surface would seem to be not that complex, but in fact it's probably one of the most complex supply chains out there. As the industry has moved to an outsourced environment, the things that people have had to deal with are ever-lengthening supply chains, and more recently, more highly complex supply chains, as suppliers are spread across the globe in many different regions. At the same time that the supply chains have been lengthening, those same companies have been dealing with shorter and shorter seasons for their products. And they've gone from 2 seasons per year to 4 seasons per year to as many as 8 seasons per year.
What does that do to your demand plan?
It makes the demand plan extremely important. The ability to have some idea of what you expect that you'll be able to or need to be able to provide for your customers becomes very important because your ability to place orders is predicated on your visibility to that demand. That visibility becomes the critical factor in making sure that you're going to have supply that's going to be adequate to meet demand. And you're doing that at the same time as you're trying to make sure that you're not going to be stuck with excess or obsolete inventory at the end of a season.
Apparel is also known for really having a lot of characteristics that they want to take into consideration. We're not just talking style, color, size. Sometimes size has more than one element to it. What does that do to the demand planning process?
Makes it more difficult. The ability to forecast at the SKU level, the style, the color, the size, or any other dimension that would go along with the size is very difficult because of the volume and because of the scarcity of data at that SKU level. Therefore, companies have to be able to interact with and create their forecast at some aggregate level of demand. And that may be an aggregate of their customer, their geography, or their product hierarchies, and understand where they have the most accurate forecast, and then be able to move that forecast both up and down those hierarchies to arrive at the number that allows them to execute that forecast to the best of their ability.
So is it feasible to do this in spreadsheets?
For maybe a very small company, but it's difficult for anybody to do it in a spreadsheet. It really requires a robust forecast and a tool that will allow for the ability to aggregate a forecast, to force a forecast from some aggregate level down to the detail, and to be able to facilitate what is a very complex process through an automated application or tool.
Makes sense. Now, with those pressures on the demand side, right, which is really got the longest lead time associated with it, and when you're thinking about being proactive, what does this do to the supply team, to the supply side of the organization? What new pressures are they facing?
The supply side is really the side that's seeing the most change in its environment. We've lived through a situation where most manufacturing was based domestically, and then it migrated from domestic to Western Hemisphere, the Caribbean Basin, Latin and South America, and then it moved to Asia, Korea, China, and then it's been moving even further throughout Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, many, many more locations, many more constraints that need to be modeled, a more complex supply chain that needs to be modeled with differing lead times and differences in constraints. The ability to model that accurately so that you can manage a supply against an expected demand has become a very big challenge for many apparel and footwear companies. So with this increasing complexity, and the ability potentially to source goods with different partners, and different partners being in different countries, I would think that modeling those various scenarios becomes a big part of what that supply team becomes responsible for. Absolutely. And the ability to be able to flexibly change that and evaluate different alternatives becomes very important. Mm-hmm. Because it's not just about a least cost producer, right? It's about the timely delivery of the goods as well. Absolutely. The ability to evaluate not only least costs, but the flexibility, the ability to shorten lead times by being flexible in perhaps the locations that intermediate products are kept, to allow for a shorter reaction to changes in the market becomes a very important ability. Mm-hmm. And of course, you have to wrap that with a very predictable product, right? You've got to have good quality that the brand owner is going to, feel comfortable represents their brand well in the marketplace. That consumer is looking for a consistent feel and a consistent quality as well. Yeah, companies from a brand perspective have to be very cognizant as they're working with different suppliers and different vendors and people that they may not have a very long track record and relationship with, making sure that those suppliers provide a product that's consistent with the expectations of that brand is very important. Mm-hmm. What do you see some of the innovative companies doing today that's allowing them to manage the supply side of their business more effectively? Well, one is moving to more advanced capabilities and optimization for supply planning, tools that recognize and can manage and can optimize a supply plan, recognizing the constraints that exist within the supply network. So that's one thing. Probably a more recent trend, and something that we feel is extremely important, is the ability to evaluate your supply chain and make intelligent decisions about where you hold inventory, anywhere from raw materials to finished goods, and intermediate points in between, to allow you to have greater flexibility, greater speed to market, better ability to react. And companies that are able to do that are going to have many more opportunities to compete in the marketplace on the basis that makes sense for them. Is that allowing more flexibility, or is that just complicating the supply side activities even more? It's not complicating it if it's done in a way that you can take your strategic objectives and goals as a company and evaluate those locations at which you can hold inventory, evaluate that based on cost, flexibility, lead time, and make the decisions about where you want to hold that inventory and in which state you'd like to hold that inventory to do the best job of meeting your customers or the apparel company's ultimate end customers' expectations and needs.
So this could really help in a full package scenario as well, when you're bringing your materials and your finished items together and staging for your postponement strategy.
It does, and the companies that are taking advantage of this type of capability or using these type of strategic tools are going to be the ones that will have the ability to position themselves at a competitive advantage and a sustainable competitive advantage, because they'd be able to do this on a regular basis, evaluating their supply chain as the supply network changes, as lead times change, as customer demands, expectations, and forecasts change.
So is that competitive advantage, does that come in terms of flexibility, or is that simply coming in terms of lower total cost?
Well, in terms of flexibility, it gives a company the opportunity to evaluate the options that exist out there in the marketplace for full package outsource, for instance. Mm-hmm. So right now, many companies just rely either on their sourcing organization to understand where something can be made and place an order and hope for the best, or a company can evaluate the true costs of doing business and the different channels or lanes throughout their supply chain network to understand how they can operate at optimal levels. So the companies that are able to do that and understand the opportunities in their supply chain are obviously going to have an advantage over those that are just placing orders and hoping for the best. At the same time, that company can evaluate not only the total cost for placing their orders and fulfilling demand, but they can also evaluate things like flexibility and speed to market. And it becomes more than just a one-point decision about, I'm going to go for the lowest total cost. And it can be more about strategic decisions about, do I want to have a higher customer service level? Do I want to be able to react to the market faster? And while it may not be the lowest overall total cost, it may allow a company to take advantage of opportunities in the marketplace that others simply can't react to in time to take that same advantage. So for a product that's a true commodity, something that doesn't change very often, has a very low fashion component, those companies are going to look for the lowest total cost. The demand for it is probably going to be very predictable. The variability in the product itself is going to be very low. And perhaps staging things at intermediate levels to provide flexibility really doesn't add a lot of value to the equation. But companies that are dealing with higher fashion component products are going to want to be able to position themselves to take advantage of changes in the marketplace, to be more reactive more quickly. Spreading it like peanut butter is probably not a good use of these type of strategic capabilities, but being very selective and understanding where you want to apply these and where you want to take advantage of the advantages it may provide for you in the marketplace becomes very strategic. Again, it leads to a competitive, sustainable advantage in the market.
And there you have it, a perspective on the soft goods and apparel industry from one of the industry's finest in supply chain management, supply chain optimization. Ed Thompson, thank you for joining us today and sharing some of your expertise.
Thank you, Corinne.
Supply Chain Horizons is sponsored by Logility, a leading provider of supply chain solutions used by more than 1,250 companies in over 70 countries around the world. You can find all our podcasts at logility.com. Just click on Library in the main navigation bar. And while you're there, we hope that you'll also download our white papers, which cover various supply chain topics. We also invite you to connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. That's it for now. Thanks again, and please join us next time for Supply Chain Horizons.